it's getting buried. Social justice, yeah, the stuff you need to know about. Fucking politics that the corporate news won't cover. You know, they don't think that you could see under, but you can now, cause the people we cover, they may not be famous, but their stories should be heard. Yeah, every voice matters. We should rise and fall together, and that's why.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday. I am Carrie Barber here with DLF and Hair of the Dog. If we started on time, you'd know something was wrong. So welcome and thank you for your patience this morning. We have a lot to talk about and a very special guest this morning. But before we get into all of that, let me toss it over to my lovely and talented co-host, Andy Kennedy. Good morning, Andy.
Good morning. How are you this fine, gray, scary-looking morning?
I'm a little sleepy. I've been getting, let me say that the preface this by saying I appreciate all of this, but I've been getting news tips coming in from yesterday late into last night. So I spent a lot of time vetting things that they're telling me and seeing if I could put this together, background. So I've been doing a lot of homework. So I'm working on a couple pretty big stories. Other than that,
do tell.
One of the tips that I got was about the attempted assassination of the judge in New Jersey. There's some interesting familial ties to New Jersey justices and things that are going on there. So I'm trying to check on those. But that one is kind of titillating when you start putting the pieces together in the background information. So I'm hoping to have that one come out Thursday or Friday if I can get all my ducks in a row. And then another one is with Attorney General Barr and his background on putting the pieces together for the last decade to do exactly what we see him doing right now, to use federal troops to usurp state and local authority. So there's plenty of evidence there, his own writing and his own words, where he talks about this fascist wet dream fantasy that he has had. And we see it coming to life now. So that one's another one that's coming out. And some other papers have already started to cover it. So I'm working with some of the people in DC to fully flesh this one out. So those will be coming.
That sounds wonderful and exciting. And I would also like to add that already this morning, Gary has used the words titillating and usurp.
That shows you I've been doing a lot of homework. Yep. That's, yeah.
Usurp is one of those words that kind of makes everyone giggle, and titillating just young boys.
Very good.
I want to start this morning with the baseball roundup. And I'm sorry if you're not a fan of sports or baseball specifically, but this is a big deal for me because I am a huge baseball fan. So much so that I spend a great deal of time in the spring, and will when my wife is able to retire, being in Florida, watching pre-season baseball games in the Dunedin area as the Blue Jays get ready for the season, which is probably one of the things I miss the most this spring and summer, is being able to watch my baseball team play. And the other thing is that I do play in a mixed ball league, and obviously we don't get to do that either, which is equally sad. But the reason I'm bringing this up and why this is relevant is that unless you have your head in the sand, and I would say that's only 45% of Americans, but it was your spring to summer ratio of COVID cases in Canada is significantly less than in the United States. And we've gone through fairly successful upgrades in our level of social distancing and our pandemic lockdown. We've had a few issues over the last couple of days as some of those restrictions have been lifted. And I think we all kind of knew that was going to happen. It's tough. But we're talking about going from 100 new cases a day in the province of Ontario to 150 or 160. So, it's certainly easy to track that way. But with the new baseball season upon us and a shortened 60-game season that's going to start on Friday, we're all, of course, excited about this. And the Blue Jays have been locked in the Rogers Centre, which is their home stadium, playing games just against themselves, doing a split squad thing, right? Which is good if you're a fan of the Jays, because you know that the Toronto's going to win. And so they played their first game against a different team last night. They went to Fenway and played against the Red Sox. Well, the anticipation of the season starting there's been a bit of a kibosh on that, because the Canadian federal government has stepped in and said, well, the U.S. has done such a poor job of keeping keeping the COVID cases down, that we're not allowing any of the baseball teams to come into Canada, which is problematic if you want to have home games. So the Blue Jays have had to go around and try to find a place to play their home games, and it looks like PNC Park in Pittsburgh is going to allow the Blue Jays to play their home games there, as well as the Pirates, right? Because it needs to be a major league sized park, not necessarily for the fans, because there won't be any fans there. But it's, just interesting. And as much as I miss baseball, I have to ask myself, do I agree with that decision? And I can't say no. That can mean, why would we have
Wait a
locked
second,
ourselves down, right?
your bias, though, for baseball, isn't it? I mean, look at all the NBA fans that are like, not happening. So, can you tell me honestly that you're being objective? If we were talking about curling or American
No,
football.
now hang on a second. I maybe I didn't explain that incorrectly. Like, I mean, I agree that American teams should not come across the border. I agree that because you're introducing an element into a place that we've worked hard to get to and done the things correctly to keep ourselves safe. And if we're going to have baseball and nobody's going to be able to go to the games, it makes sense to me that it doesn't matter where they're played if the only place you're going to see them is on television, right? Or on the internet, wherever. So I agree with the decision, despite the fact that I'm a huge baseball fan and would love them to see them back in Toronto. Right? So that's my take on it anyway.
Well, okay, all right. So I'll concede that point. I think that makes sense. So, real quick, I want to pivot because I hate baseball. I absolutely.
Yeah, no, I got that.
But I applaud the Toronto team and everything that Canada is doing. I do feel badly that you guys have worked so hard, and then you're going to import Canadians who would now be at risk for having been here. So.
Well, but the thing is, our cases of us are so low right now that it's so much easier for the powers that be to track those cases, right? And to put a microscope over any outbreaks in any of the areas, right? It's a much different situation than the United States, where you've got 60,000 new cases daily. Like, I mean, you can't track that. It's physically impossible to do. Right?
True.
So that's a big deal.
True. Well, speaking of COVID, if you're waking up this morning and seeing the headlines, you will see splashed everywhere this fire on the lawn at the consulate in Houston, Texas. So this is the Chinese consulate, where the diplomats there are burning classified documents. And everybody's freaking the fuck out. Let me explain to you how this actually works and why this is merely a distraction. So I grew up in the diplomatic corps. My dad worked for State Department for a number of years. So even as a student, a high school student, you get briefings. And when you go there, they tell you that, hey, we love your service. We love your family. We want you to do well, blah, but your number one number one requirement here is to protect classified information. And in the event that the country that you're in becomes unstable and we have to evacuate in an emergency, you are required to destroy confidential documents. So I can tell you, growing up in my house, we had my dad had a safe room. The door was, 8 inches thick and it was steel. And this entire room was reinforced and it had bulletproof windows. And in that room was a shredder. So the whole idea was that you are to give your life to protect the classified information that you may have. So this is what you see in U.S. embassies, U.S. consulates. They will burn documents, they will shred documents, that sort of thing. So this is what you are seeing in Houston. Now let's step back a little bit. Why are the Chinese diplomats doing this in Houston? Because last night, the State Department, by order of the Trump administration, was closing down a consulate that happened to be located in Houston. So the difference is an embassy is located in a capital city like Washington, D.C. So the Chinese embassy is in Washington, D.C. When you're outside of a capital city, you have a smaller location called a consulate, right? So there is a consulate in Houston, and they are being ordered to vacate that office by Friday. So in response, China said, okay, America, you will vacate your consulate in Wuhan. So the U.S. has a consular office in a high-rise building in Wuhan. And so China and the U.S. have decided, okay, we're going to close consulates. Here's why it's a distraction. We still have, and I pulled up, if you go to the State Department and you look at the number of embassies and consulates in China, it's pretty significant. So in China right now today, we have our embassy in Beijing, and then in Guangzhou, we have a consulate. In Chengdu, we have a consulate. In Shanghai, we have a consulate. In Shenyang, we have a consulate. And then the last and smallest is in Wuhan. So all of this, don't panic. What is happening is kind of this kabuki theater, this posturing. If two countries dissolve their diplomatic ties, that's significant. But let's remember, we have a State Department that within the first 6 months of this new administration coming in, almost the entirety of the executive team resigned and have not been replaced fully. So we're running with a State Department that is not fully staffed, that is not appropriately directed. So you have diplomats serving and risking their lives around the world with their families. So these are people who are patriots, who have their spouses with them and their children, who are not being adequately supported and have not been for the last 3.5 years. They are being put at risk through this manipulative activity going back and forth between China and Trump. And please don't make the wrong assumption that Trump and the Chinese leadership are fighting. They're not. We know this from the first few years of their cozy relationship. We had North Korea, we had China. We have backed off. We have quite literally backed off on our support for Hong Kong. And you had Barr come out, Attorney General Barr, and say that Hong Kong no longer has the U.S.'s support as an independent entity. That just happened. So that is a really nice handoff to Beijing and a pat on the back. At the same time, you're seeing this embassy, the consulate fire in Houston. Do not be distracted. Here's what we've learned so far from this administration. Whenever they do something like this, you're meant to look at it. And a fire makes a really good video montage for the news media. So you have this fire going on in Houston. It's what's coming next that you need to pay attention to. So one of the stories that I've been working on that we've seen around here is what's going on in Portland and what is now coming to Chicago and Milwaukee and other democratically held cities around the country. So that is what you're being distracted from. There is a huge fight about to happen, and I don't mean on the ground, I mean legally, because Barr is using, in my opinion, Barr is using an erroneous argument that came out of a Supreme Court decision to enact federal martial law in select cities. And that means that all of this between the ACLU and all of these other suing organizations going against Barr and the federal government and these agencies will go back to the Supreme Court for a final decision. And that's why this matters. So you're not supposed to be paying attention to any of that. You're supposed to be paying attention only to this manufactured crisis in Houston. So that's all I'm going to say on that subject on this time. So we have Mike Toller on, and he's backing up my claim from a U.S. Army perspective. He said it's the same thing for the Army, that they are there to protect the documents. Your life does not matter compared to these documents that you're there to protect. So,
are you saying that this moment is a shiny object squirrel moment?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And so whenever you see one of these, we should know by now, whenever you see one of these, the bigger the shine, the more bullshit's coming from the other side. So this one has me nervous, not because of what's going on in Houston, but because of what's going down in Chicago.
And I think they do say that everything is big in Texas.
Well, there you go. You now have a lawn fire, which who the hell cares? They're burning documents on the lawn. Okay, they own those documents. They can burn them. Who cares?
I'd just like to mention at this point that we have a visitor.
Oh, yay! Okay, so without further ado, we have this wonderful, wonderful journalist who is also from Chicago. Yay, Chi-Town! Who runs a podcast and has a website that is dedicated to subjects that is near and dear to my heart. Whistleblowers, and all of this information that you're not going to see in corporate media. So, Kevin, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Good morning. And you are right in Chicago. I'm like 30 minutes to the northwest. Yeah. So we expect some great video footage from you this weekend.
If I feel like risking losing an eye, maybe. I mean, I have to consider what will happen if I take myself out of the game. I mean, it's been really dangerous. I mean, I joke, I kid a little bit, but there have been 6 or 7 journalists that have lost eyes in the last 2 months.
Well, we were talking about that on Monday. We have a volunteer journalist in Portland, and we were talking about getting him credentials, and we mutually decided, no, please don't wear journalist credentials because that is painting a target on yourself, and you're better off blending in. Which is insane.
I think they say that about medical personnel now too.
Yes, yeah. Well, we saw that in D.C. with the priest who was administering medical care, who was hit with rubber bullets while she was tending to the wounded, so that Trump could get his photo op. So, yeah. So, Kevin, give us a rundown on your credentials. Tell everybody why they should listen to you, because you're not on NBC, so...
Yeah, nobody knows me, so what am I doing on this show? I've spent the last 10 years covering whistleblowers, and then also examining like leak prosecutions and leak investigations, and looking at how the government responds to unauthorized disclosures of information, and the way it kind of relates to your conversation that you were having previously about how the government protects secrets, looking at secrecy systems and how those are used, looking at what's classified versus what's unclassified, what they'll allow to be public, what they won't allow to be public. And intertwined in all of that are these human stories of people who have made choices. I usually don't judge them. I come down more sympathetically in most of the cases. I try to figure out what was going on with the institutions and why these people decided to make the decisions that they made. And I accept that there are laws and that they are accused of violating them. And I accept that there's classified information and that they are, generally speaking, supposed to protect that information from being disclosed. But in these cases, I try to see where you recognize that the person lost a trust in their role, they lost a trust in their superiors, they lost faith in what they were doing. So I've covered high-profile cases. Most people who have seen my work saw my coverage of Chelsea Manning when she was put through a court-martial back in 2013, and obviously we're talking about somewhere around 750,000 documents that were disclosed by an individual soldier. And most people's argument against her was that she couldn't have known what's in this information. It's not whistleblowing. You released a lot of material, and some of it was just showing generally how the United States operates all of its agencies. And I fully get that argument, but then on the other side, there's the articulation that she gave in the court martial for why she was picking these sets of documents, which I found interesting and compelling. And there are some things that did have a really good impact and improved my public knowledge, improved my knowledge as a journalist. And there are things that I think opened up a good conversation about what the government keeps secret and what the government doesn't release. And some of these documents are documents that you would never see released until 25 years later, because that's how the classification system works. And then they also have ways to go back into the system and add extensions for keeping documents secret. So I think that's an important way to set up the conversation, because we're talking about Reality Winner, who saw a document that was actually really innocent when you look at its details, because it's essentially a very common spear phishing attack against any email account. It could be against any email account. It doesn't have to be .gov. It could be against a business account. It could be against your account. And it's very standard. And yet, for some reason, the government had it classified in such a way that allowed that put Reality in this situation where she
Well,
got fired.
let me jump in here real quick. So I just posted the presidential policy that was done in, I think it was 2012, and then the whistleblower policy that was signed by President Obama. So this all affects Chelsea Manning and Reality and a number of other people. In fact, there were 8 people under the Obama administration that were charged with espionage. And the differentiation that they made, because these laws were meant to protect employees, as you said, who become federal employees, who become disillusioned with their leadership, but are adhering to their oath, right? So the difference was, you can go to your superior, you can go within internal channels, whatever they are, but the minute you go to press, the fourth branch, now you're at risk of being charged with espionage. So to your point, it didn't really matter what the source was. It could be an email, it could be, something else. Like for example, if I get somebody who sends me an NBC News article and says, okay, here's what they published, here's the real story behind it, and then provide me some detail. Now that person could be charged under the Espionage Act because they spoke to me.
Yeah. The only problem with the dynamic there that you're describing is that it's only applied to lower level officers and staff in these institutions. We know that a good example, one that I'm working on a story right now, but it kind of affects Reality because she was in the Air Force. And so we know that we've seen under Trump that they've escalated the amount of secrecy that they want around military operations abroad. It probably doesn't come through in CNN or MSNBC coverage or whatever you're watching, but we actually saw James Mattis, against what the Pentagon policy was, describe a battle plan that was going to be executed in Afghanistan before it was even carried out. And if a soldier like Reality Winner had talked to the press about that, she would have gotten in trouble for it. and that would have fit the reasons that they usually give for why they want to punish people like Reality Winner, because they, more than anything, often claim that this gave the enemy notice of where troops were going to be, and a lot of times that doesn't really come out to be the truth. But at the same time, I'm just saying that this is what they say as their argument for why they need to bring these cases. So I don't think it's actually applied evenly, and I don't think you really can apply it evenly. So one of the problems here that Reality found herself in during this period when the document was disclosed was that you had a lot of people in these institutions that were revealing what the government had in their records about the alleged Russian interference with Trump and the ties between his campaign and Russian officials or Russian business people. And she's watching this unfold in the media, and she sees that there are leaks in the press, and she sees that there are people who are anonymously sharing information. There are senior officials and higher ranking people who are sharing, and potentially lower ranking people who did it and never got caught. We just don't know their names. They were taking a higher risk than the superior officers. And she says, I have this document in front of me, and it looks like something that should be part of the conversation. To me, I think we need to discuss what may have been happening if, in fact, Russian hackers were targeting the voter registration systems of this company in Florida. And so she takes the document and smuggles it out of her facility, of her base. And I guess, so she was a contractor. I don't know if she was exactly on a base while she was doing this work, but she was a contractor for the NSA working for a firm. And she smuggles this document out that is classified. I think it is classified. Although I would challenge the classification of it. I would say that a good defense attorney, had we gotten to a trial, would have challenged whether it was actually secret information, because, like I said, it's a very common spear phishing attack. There's no real methods, there's no real sources or methods being revealed by it that this company received a email that was a spear phishing attack. And so she smuggles this out and she gives it to The Intercept, and then subsequently after that, she gets arrested and put on trial for violating the Espionage Act. And the one last thing I'll say here in our conversation is the use of this law is actually fairly new in the last 10 to 15 years for what it's being used for. Typically in our history, it had not been used for leaks. It was used for people who were accused of treason or engaging in seditious acts, betraying their country, going after people who we thought were unpatriotic. And that would go after people maybe who did things like what Reality Winner did, because their governments could believe that they were traitors. But by and large, it wasn't used to control information. It's being used more now than ever to control information and kind of make up for the fact that the classification system is not been able to keep pace with the amount of information that is being created on a daily basis every year, especially since the September 11th attacks. And so there's just so much information that are in these databases, and it's classified. And I think it's fair to say that most agencies and institutions don't even know what they have classified.
Okay, well, let me jump in here from the question as to ownership, right? And I'm not talking about the information, although that is obviously part of Reality Winner's case and Snowden and other things. We're talking about ownership of the individual. And let me put it in context. If you join the military, you sign an agreement that you are quite literally owned by the military. So if you go out and get a sunburn and are unable to participate in your duties, you could be censured because you have harmed U.S. military property, i.e. your body. Same thing happens with contractors. When you sign that employment agreement, there is a document that you sign that says, I acknowledge the U.S. government can kill me if I violate any of these terms. So this goes to who has ownership here, right? So we have all of these government contractors, reality being one of them, where she was acting in what she thought was part of a known conversation. And I'm not going to put words in her mouth, and I haven't read specifically her defense testimony, but obviously she felt like this was a necessary component that had to be out there. So she took that action. And then on top of who has ownership of Reality Winner as a person, not just her work, but her personhood, now you have the complex question of equal protection. Because to your argument, we have this rule being improperly applied across the entire base of those persons who are owned by the federal government.
Yeah. And I actually go the opposite direction because I think what has gone wrong in the last 10 to 15 years is that we're using the Espionage Act to control something that should be done administratively. As if I talk to employees who have worked for the CIA and the FBI and these other places, it used to be that you would just go through administrative sanctions. So, like, okay, you're demoted because you leaked this information, or you're going to remove you from this post because you leaked this information. We can't trust you anymore. To escalate it to a felony where you could be put in prison for up to 10 years. And also, like, you can stack these charges pretty quickly because if you leak 10 documents, that can be 10 different Espionage Act charges where it's a charge of up to 10 years for each of those documents. So you are quickly looking at the potential of a maximum sentence of 100 years in prison. And when we think of what this is and what it can mean for changing somebody's life, and when you look at the choices that the persons are making and then the kind of moral dilemma that some of these people are going through, where they're not sure that they can go to their office. Yes, there are proper channels that are said to exist for someone to do whistleblowing, but I'd say that they are really imperfect channels because you're going to be giving information, and we've seen this with Donald Trump, so I don't have to talk in the abstract. You give it to the Inspector General's office, but you don't know that that Inspector General's office isn't sharing that information with the Justice Department about you because they think that not only are you whistleblowing, but you might also be leaking to the press. So there's a lot of profiling that happens that they claim isn't happening, but we have in the last 10 years developed, and this happened after Chelsea Manning and it accelerated after Edward Snowden, developed an insider threat program in our government agencies that is very intrusive. And if you talk about owning somebody, this program basically is set up to do continuous total surveillance of your actions as an employee, particularly in the Pentagon, but also in these intelligence agencies. And it's tracking your keystrokes, everything you open on your computer screen. And there's also not a lot of oversight, so we don't know if this follows you when you're off duty. So are they able to track you while you're in your home, doing whatever you do on your private computer? And I think that on one hand, I understand that they want to know what's happening with their systems. But on the other hand, there is a question that I don't think we've been able to debate as a society that we should be allowed to debate because so much technology has developed in the last 15 to 20 years. So we should have this debate about freedom of speech and whether we think these employees should be able to talk, because I think obviously we have specific documents, so I don't want to ignore that in the example. But I also would tell you that if Reality had just talked to The Interceptor, had just talked to a media organization about what she was seeing, she would be punished and in trouble. And I don't think that's right, because I think that you should be able to talk about what you're doing in your job. And it just seems to me that we are, the dynamic that we have set up almost ensures that you get the kind of Trump level corruption that we have now in our government, because you need those lower level people, because that's how, look at Amazon. That's how we find out that people in Amazon fulfillment centers are being put through horrible conditions. But just imagine if Amazon had set up the system in such a way where they could fully get away with firing and crushing and punishing every person who spoke out. And they said, we'll only let the CEO and we'll only let the people who run the PR team talk about what's happening at Amazon. Well, then clearly that's going to make it easier to abuse people who are working and allow for the spread of COVID-19, and they're not going to get to speak up. But we've now seen in the last month lots of whistleblowers from Amazon speak out, and it forced Jeff Bezos and everyone to change their facilities. And I'd say that I think that the classification system is used in a way in our military and our intelligence agencies to prevent the superiors from having to change what they do. Because I don't think it's always just, oh, they lack respect for classified information. I think they actually are living something and they don't know how to change it, and they go to the media as a last resort because they're not convinced that talking to people inside is, because we've had things that actually involved the safety and the lives of soldiers. We have people who have blown the whistle about not getting enough body armor. We've had people who have revealed in the last 20 years, we've had people who went and said, we've had TSA whistleblowers, people who say that you're not allowing us to wear masks to prevent the spread of COVID-19, and that means that travelers are getting it. We've had whistleblowers that say you're not putting air marshals properly on planes, so how do we know that you're actually fighting terrorism
Right.
properly?
Kevin, let me jump in real quick here. I want to get to one of the questions from one of our viewers. Mike asks a question for you. He says, how has the ease and prevalence of end-to-end encryption in the past few years for the average person impacted the danger level on whistleblowers? And I think you talked about that just a little bit.
So like end-to-end encryption is something that truly frightens the government because it does allow for the privacy of sharing this information. So it means that it's harder to track, but the government has developed ways to, we believe that they have ways to crack that encryption. So it's not entirely, it doesn't entirely mean that if you are a whistleblower and you use the encryption that you would be able to not be detected. So I think that what it has done is made anyone who uses these tools, you can call them anonymity tools or privacy tools, anybody who uses these, which are widely available. In fact, the U.S. government funded them. The State Department funded something called the Tor project, which they wanted human rights groups in countries that were where the State Department was fighting for human rights, fighting against human rights abuses, and also supporting civil society activists in those countries abroad. They were funding these tools so that they could be used. This was post-Arab Spring, like in 2011, when you saw these uprisings in Middle East and Northern Africa. And they've been funding these projects, and so now we're all using them, and it's kind of incredible because the U.S. government funded the development of these projects in support of this technology, but now their intelligence agencies say this gets in the way of what they're able to do in the way of going after people. So I think that it's made the government personnel more it's sort of this thing where they presume that you must be hiding something from them if you're using the encryption, and so that becomes the pretext to look
Well,
at you
if you're not doing anything wrong, then you're not worried, right? So why would you need that encryption?
Well, I just think what I'm trying to say is that encryption isn't a sign of criminality, because we all want to be able to have that private communication with someone. It doesn't like I could use encryption just to keep a sensitive conversation that I didn't want somebody else in my family to know about. It doesn't necessarily have to be that I'm trying to hide something from the government.
True, but
Isn't that
Go
isn't
ahead.
it fascist regimes that are the ones that say you have nothing to fear, you have nothing to hide?
Yeah,
That's
right.
exactly right.
Yes. Yeah. Thinking of Stasi Germany.
So
Mm.
let's I wanted to get to real quick before we ran out of time. You started a new newsletter, Dissenter, and in it you featured two stories that I thought were really good. This first one is on Reality Winner, and I'll put it up on the screen here. So reality, this one I think is just I shake my head because we had like Roger Stone didn't serve any time in jail and he was
Mhm.
released. You had all of these high profile people not serve time in jail. Even my own governor here, Kevin, didn't Blodgevich get out of jail,
Yeah,
right?
Blagojevich got out. Yes.
Yeah, the
That was because he was commuted by Trump. Yeah.
Right. So here we have Reality, whose bunkmate is was really sick with COVID symptoms. Like she's not asymptomatic. She's literally hacking in really in a bad way. And now Reality has the same issue, and she's not getting the same kind of treatment. Not even humanitarian treatment,
And
according
so what
to.
I know is that so far her family hasn't reported any symptoms,
Okay.
so that's good. But you take the test. I suppose it's to the prison's credit that they're testing people who aren't claiming to be sick, but just testing people who might have come in contact with this bunkmate and others and tracking the spread. But it's really serious. There are over 500 prisoners at this facility who have COVID-19, who have tested positive for the virus. And also, the Bureau of Prisons will even tell you that means that all of those people have COVID-19 because they do a number for tests, but they say that doesn't necessarily mean that's how many people have the virus because we might test an inmate multiple times. So 510 is about as accurate as it gets for official statistics to know that's a lot of people that have it. And Reality says that there are 250 people. This is what she's told her family. There are about 250 people, including her, who are now in one unit. It's set up as like a quarantine, and they're all right there. But what's really troubling is she's been fighting for a compassionate release since April, and she went before a federal court. And she said, I have this medical history, and I think I qualify for a compassionate release. She invoked a part of one of the very few things you can say that has come out of the last 4 years that might actually help people. It's the First Step Act. It was very modest criminal justice reform that allowed some inmates whose time was up and they deserved to get out of prison. So she invoked the First Step Act, and that meant that she could go before a district court and make her case for release. And the district court looked it over and said, I think absurdly that because she's in a medical prison, that they're best equipped to deal with people who are getting COVID-19. She's in an all right place, and they can take care of you. And I think this judge should go visit a prison because there's no way you can social distance in a prison. That's the biggest point. Whenever you're talking about this issue, even if you feel like a broken record and you say it over and over again, I think you have to remind yourself that this isn't the Marriott. You can't just go spread out in the lobby or whatever. And they are on top of each other. There's 2 and 3 people in one little space that's sharing bunks close to each other. And even if you have masks, you're still really in close proximity to people. And those masks, we don't know how often those are being cleaned. Every week to 2 weeks, I think they get to have them put in the laundry and cleaned. And so that's not great for safety as far as the prison goes and I guess the last thing I'll say before you follow up on this is the prison knew this was coming. They were warned that this would happen. In the same way that people warned that reopening too soon in Texas would result in the spikes and surges. And it's just common sense that the community is going to bring the virus into the facility. And the way the virus gets into the facility is if they're not adding new inmates, if they're not bringing new people to the prison, it's the staff, it's the people who are employees at the prison who bring it in and out. And even Reality Winner will say that it's the staff that is spreading it to the solitary confinement or the isolation units where people were quarantined who were supposed to be safe. Well, the staff tracked it in there and that spread to people who were in protective.
Well, Kevin, let me ask you a question here from the other point of view. Okay, Reality Winner, whatever, she's in jail. Why the hell would we care about her and prisoners? Aren't we about to do the same thing to our own children in schools?
Yeah, well, I suppose I would say, because this is kind of like, I guess this is kind of like the Ron DeSantis argument, right? That like we've been opening our bars and we've been letting people have go back to celebrating with their friends and going out and partying, and we have allowed people to go back to all the shops. We've opened our movie theaters. We're letting amusement parks come back online. Here in Florida, you can go to Disney World now, and the lines are shorter than ever. So come on down to Mickey Mouse Land. And but that was the wrong choice. I mean, that everyone would agree that was the wrong choice. But he's actually been using that wrong choice to justify reopening schools.
Well, Betsy DeVos, Betsy
say
said that there's a I forget the term she used, but the overarching point is collateral damage. So if 1% of our children die, it's totally acceptable. So here you're making the case for prisoners, and I'm pretty sure we still have laws about humane treatment, even though we now have 4 UN sanctions against the way we're treating immigrants and children. But all of that aside, we still have laws on the books about humane treatment of our prisoners. But we're about to do worse. Well, we're doing worse to our own citizens and our own children, not to mention teachers and teachers who teach at multiple schools. And so, but you.
And we also have, we know from Dr. Burdett from the Waukegan area that we talked to, who's a friend of the show and our network, that has said that it's all about viral load and what you're getting, right? If you encounter someone with COVID in a kind of just a second encounter, the chances are you're not going to get infected from that. But if you standing in front of someone or you're socially isolating with them, you don't know they have the disease, you're getting more of the virus, and the chances are that it's going to make you more sick. So you're talking about incubation places like jails, right, or seniors facilities. Yeah. Right, which is where we're finding the most problems, right? And now we're talking about setting that up in schools. Isn't that lovely? But where kids are kids, they get over everything. They'll be fine. They just become little COVID incubators, and then they go home, and then their parents get infected, and they can't survive it. So we're looking at an entire population of orphans.
Yeah. No, I think the humane thing and the reasonable thing that a lot of people are asking for, and it should be engaged with, is that there's a lot of people who are probably we'll take Carswell. So the facility that Reality's in Fort Worth, Texas is called Carswell. I don't know how many of those people are there for which sentences, but let's just take the people first who are there for 1 to 3 years or 3 to 5 years. And let's start with them. And let's presume that they're probably close to the end of their sentences, like Reality. You start with them. You decarcerate or you release them because it's better to just put them in home confinement and deal with them. And we know we don't have any love for Bill Barr as an attorney general, but he's shown one aspect of how he's a fraud by issuing this order that instructed the BOP to see which prisoners could be put into home confinement in order to stop the spread inside the prisons. And that just hasn't happened. In fact, they fought it in Ohio. There was a really bad outbreak, I think in Elkton was the facility, and that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court actually made it harder for the facility to deal with the crisis. So, because it came down on the side of Donald Trump. So, but it's very simple. All they have to do is remove bodies, because the virus incubation becomes a lot harder if you remove people from the prison.
Interesting point here. But before we get out of here, I have one more story that I wanted to cover here real quick. This was your piece on ICE, and this is on your actual website, Shadowproof. So it's similar. We're still talking about COVID, but now we're talking about a federal agency. The whistleblowers are trying to expose what's going on with ICE and their, what you call, indifference. So what's going on with that? If we can't get prisons to do it, how do we expect these ICE folks who, you know, are dealing with immigrants, and I just want to make the point, legal immigrants who are seeking asylum coming across the border.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that real quick before we call it a day here.
Yeah, so just very quickly, there's this company called LaSalle that runs some facilities. There's one in Louisiana called Richwood, and there's some whistleblowers that have submitted information to Congress and let them know that the people running this company are about as bad as Ron DeSantis or Dan Patrick in Texas, because they even said to staff that if you got a flu shot, you're probably okay, so stop griping, and also it can't be any worse than the flu. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what they walked away with.
Yeah, that's a right-wing talking point. We still hear that. Trump is now walking around wearing a mask, and people are still saying more people die from the flu, as if any death is okay. And now you have leadership within this organization actually saying this. So going back to the whole whistleblower thing, if your boss and your boss's boss is saying, not a big deal, and you speak up, now it's not only a career-limiting move, but you could have legal issues as a result, right?
Yeah, maybe. But so far, it sounds like they're okay. So, I mean, it's just really bad because what they're doing very quickly here in a few seconds, it's that they're mixing these immigrants who have been detained. The sick and the healthy are not really separated out. They don't really have the ability to do that. And then you also have the fact that they didn't allow staff to wear masks early on. And staff were asking to wear masks around even detainees that had COVID-19, and they were not immediately allowed until mid-April, but that was well after the public health emergency had been issued in just Louisiana. I mean, we know we were all starting to take precautions in March, but we're just taking the state of Louisiana. They were even defying their own governor there by not allowing staff to protect. So I think, this is the other side of it, is that I support the people who are in these facilities and are trapped, but I also think we should recognize that the staff are treated like sacrificial lambs. And there was a common theme that I found in a lot of the stories I did in the last months, where they didn't want staff, correctional officers, to wear masks because they thought it would make the inmates fearful that they had lost control of the virus, or that something bad was going to happen. And so not wearing a mask has been kind of like a way to give us a false sense that it's not really spreading. And now we can see, because there are numbers on the Bureau of Prisons website, that it's a lie. I mean, the Bureau of Prisons, people should know the Bureau of Prisons has been lying to us for the last 2 or 3 months about what COVID was like inside their facilities, claiming it was safe. And now we're seeing these outbreaks happen across the country.
Wow. Yeah, and I think, Andy, to go back to your point, Dr. Burdett, he made the statement when he was talking about ethylene oxide, and then it became true for COVID. It is so elegant and horrifying. He said that we are the ones who suffer so that others can live comfortably. And we see that in policy, in how we manufacture these social justice communities. And then it was just completely blown up under COVID, where over and over and over again, and now you've got the prisoners, you've got immigrants, you've got ICE workers, you've got teachers and students and families, so all down the line. So one real quick shout out to Nathan Tankus, who has written extensively on the financial implications of all of this and what's coming. So it's not a market crash that's coming. We're talking about everything, because we are not paying attention to some of the work that Kevin's doing here about pointing the logical conclusion of the decisions that we're making, the cause and effect. So, Kevin, you've got a podcast. How do people tune in and listen and follow your work?
Yeah, so I'll just quickly plug that I do a weekly show called, so for what we're talking about in our conversation, I do a weekly YouTube show called Dissenter Weekly, where I go over these whistleblower stories every week. And that posts, we do that on Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern, so people can tune in live if they wanted to actually catch it, or archives. And then I recently launched this newsletter that is a combination of free and paid reports that are going to be coming out. And so that is the Dissenter. It's over at substack.com. You can find it as Dissenter. And the first thing we started with was covering Reality Winner, because it happened to be what I consider to be the most pressing thing at the moment. But the next thing I have queued up is looking at the Pentagon and how they have a massive leak investigation that they've launched.
Excellent, excellent. So we so appreciate you tuning in here. Andy, any final comments or questions for Kevin before?
Well, there was just one point that I wanted to make about, I don't know if you saw it or not, but President Trump was quoted yesterday saying that COVID-19 was going to get worse before it got better.
That's good of him to say that, I guess.
Yeah, I think you could actually expand on that and just apply that to his presidency, right? But I did want to mention, and that the reason that this is Whistleblower Wednesday is because of the other platform that I'm involved with Real Progressives is doing a national outreach call tonight with Bill Black, the granddaddy of all whistleblowers, and the two gentlemen, Patrick Lovell and Eric Vaughn, that are responsible for creating The Con, which is a documentary about the Keating Five and all of that whistleblowing that went on back several decades ago, that continued up until the crescendo of the great financial crisis in 08, 09. And so that is that documentary, the first episode of that documentary, I believe there's either 4 or 6, I'm not 100% sure, but that will be released to the public on the 5th of August. And so we're going to be talking about that. And of course, Bill Black is just an amazing speaker and has so many great stories, but also very funny ones. And
he had me falling out of my chair. And this is where his students, his PhD students, call him Captain Black, as in the pirate.
Yes, I believe they got him a parrot.
He is wonderful. So yeah, I will put that on my calendar. The SNL scandal that I grew up with, so showing my age, but people need to be aware of how things work, because even Bill Black faced some pushback from his own agency. Mm-hmm. So that, thank you, Andy. I didn't know that was coming. So very cool.
Yes, well, absolutely. It's we've done, actually, we do have a podcast. I produce podcasts for the called Macro and Cheese, and of course we've done 2 separate podcasts with Bill Black, and one just recently that we did that named The Con, with the 3 gentlemen that are going to be doing the national outreach call tonight. So interested, check it out. It's super, super interesting stuff, and just goes part and parcel with what we've been talking about on the show today. So
Right.
it's awesome.
Absolutely. So, Kevin, thank you again. And for the rest of our viewers here, we have we've got this really great interview, and not because I did it, but a local Chicago activist, Stringer Harris, that'll be coming up tomorrow. And Stringer talks about how to effectively enact change in the police department, which is damn near unheard of, but he's actually done it. And he's working on the current cases in the headlines in Joliet, Illinois for Eric Lurie. So that interview will be coming out tomorrow. And then tonight we are actually hosting the National Progressive Party Weekly Update. This is part of Living Our Progressive brand, here to support other independent news and progressive causes by using our network, our technology, and our know-how to make sure that the word gets out, and we are elevating these voices, because corporate media is really expensive and really, really big, and they give us no time of day. So this
and icky.
and icky, absolutely. So Kevin, thank you so much for your work and your time today. Everybody go check out Kevin. We put up your Twitter handle as well as shadowproof.com, and then while you're at shadowproof.com, sign up for the Dissenter newsletter and check out all of his podcasts and writing, and support him in his good work. So
I think it was good to talk to both of you.
thank you
And
very much.
my one bit of advice for you would be shatterproof goggles.
Yeah, we need to find some marketing opportunities here.
Well, that's funny. You should mention that. We should talk after the show. So, all right, from all of us here at DLF, Hair of the Dog, thank you so much. And we will see you back here on Friday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern. Until then, have a good day and stay safe.
Take care.